And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, a Toronto-based certified clinical hypnotherapist who specializes in a number of modalities, including working with individuals who feel that they have had experiences with extraterrestrial beings. Most of her fascinating work, as well as metaphysical therapies such as past life and interlife regression, takes place at Lesley's Toronto hypnosis clinic, Lightwork Hypnosis. Lesley, thank you so much for being our guest this evening, and welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be here and to be able to connect with your wonderful listeners, viewers. And, I want you to ask me anything that comes into your fabulous mind. There's nothing off limits.
Well, thank you. I don't know. That could be get some wild questions.
Of course.
Did you start out your hypnotherapy practice wanting to regress people about UFOs? And if not, how did you take a turn into that direction?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to say that I was initially completely interested in regression. Now, I cannot say that it was specifically experience-related regression that I was interested in, but I came to this work kind of late in life, if I may say, and at a certain point after a long career in the music business, I felt completely unfulfilled. I thought, what am I doing? I'm blowing people's egos up for 3 months while their records are released and then blah, so this is ridiculous work. And my husband, bless his heart, he knew I was in kind of a crossroads, as it were. So he bought me a past life regression with a not the woman I eventually studied with, but a noted hypnotherapist. And I went through that process, which was of course illuminating, but the main thing that I took away from that process was, I can do this. This is something that is so natural to me. I can guide people through these experiences. I cannot tell you why. I believe now that most likely it was because I had done this work in other lifetimes. I mean, hypnosis is 6,000 years old by recorded history, and possibly a good deal older than that if we accept the idea of previous sophisticated civilizations prior to the flood, antediluvian civilizations. But that is what really sparked me to completely change directions to what I was doing. So initially, the first step was to become a certified hypnotist. So I went to the Ontario School of Hypnosis and I studied with the eminent Dr. Georgina Cannon, who is still teaching and doing all the things. And she's no relation to Dolores Cannon, by the way. People always, I knew that was coming. Yep. People often ask, but so I had the good fortune to take that basic training. And then, I kind of went into the trenches for a while in that sense. I worked for, what I call a hypno mill, which is a kind of a hypnosis clinic where people come in mainly for weight loss and cessation of smoking, cigarette smoking, and these kinds of really sort of practical, accepted kinds of things. So I worked in a place like that. And then eventually, I like to think of it as doing an internship like at Bellevue, because it was pretty wacky. And by the when I was when I've been doing that for a few years, I went back to Georgina Cannon and I took my certifications in past life regression, interlife regression, and something I call it energy release. Some people call it entity release. That's not quite how I see it, but so energy release. Now, even at that point, I was doing past life regressions and, lots of them. And I was also at this point working for Dr. Georgina's clinic. So about once a month, uh, someone would call in and say, I have missing time, blah, blah, blah. I have, dreams. I think I've been encountered. And, and nobody else in the clinic wanted anything to do. They didn't want not a 10-foot pole, not a 40-foot pole. No, nothing. So, and I said, great, I would love to work with these people. So it kind of began like that. And then I have to say, I believe in the laws of attraction and quantum entanglement. And once I got out there doing that kind of work, and then I also spoke at several conventions and this, that, and the other, and some random radio shows, but the word began to get out. And I think what was most helpful in my work with these dear people is I became a member of the Experiencer Research Project as part of MUFON's, under the umbrella of MUFON and run by Kathleen Martin. So I was often sent individuals who the people doing the intake at MUFON believe had genuine experiences. So, things really kind of took off. And then my recent book is a couple of years old, and that was about an individual I worked with from the very beginning, the first session, who wasn't sure if he was an experiencer or not. So that's kind of, I came to this work in a sort of a I don't know, propinquitous kind of way. But I feel that it was all intended, and I feel that I could not have really done this work until I had passed through the life experiences, the learning experiences that I have accumulated at least in this current lifetime.
How many UFO or alien experiences do you think you've actually hypnotized? Hundreds, thousands?
Well, I think Philip, I think it's been about close to 20 years. If we want to, let's just to be safe, let's knock it down to 15 years. And I mean, I see people every week who are dealing with this experience, 3 people, 5 people. So I have to say it's a significant amount of individuals that I've been blessed to work with. And, you know, one thing you might, I don't know, wonder about is I think a lot of people have the idea of experiencers being from some like low economic strata, low education, and certainly, we think of these old guys in the South with like one tooth who saw a UFO. This is a kind of an unfortunate stereotypical viewpoint that has been encouraged, I think, by the government and the media. But the truth is that this work that I do with helping these experiencers, these very special people to recall, uh, to get past any memory blocks, to embrace what has happened to them, and to integrate it into their beings. So these dear people, cross all socioeconomic, racial, uh, you name it, kinds of lines. I have worked with people who are judges and attorneys and doctors, and I've worked with people who are on assistance who can barely cope.
Have you seen any patterns?
I think I think maybe the biggest pattern, of course, we have to ask why. Why these people? Why these particular people that are being plucked and, and engaged with or whatever? Well, the commonality seems to be psychic ability. And I after working with so many of these people. I think every experiencer that I have ever worked with has outstanding psychic ability and comes from a family, maybe often just from the female line, but comes from a genetic predisposition towards psychic ability. So what I would have to say is, and now there are a lot of other things a lot of other more negative things we can go to, but if you were an advanced species who had a genetic connection to Terrans, that's us, and you came across, a group of apes, and a small amount of them had developed some type of glottal abilities to form words. Now, wouldn't you rather spend your time with those beings that were able to communicate even in a rudimentary way? I think that is what we are dealing with here. I think the beings that are being, taken, and I don't even like that expression, but the beings who are engaging with extraterrestrials and ultra-terrestrials are individuals who have psychic abilities, who have chosen to be here at this time for the remarkable things that we're going to see.
Are most of the encounters benign, or are there some that are negative?
Well, Jeffrey, I would say upwards of 90% of the encounters that people relate to me or that we are able to uncover are benign. And I think that if I could just, shuffle back for a moment to a little bit of ufology history. Now, in the Roswell crash, the great, which I would have to call ground zero for the modern era of ufology, during the Roswell crash, which was actually 3 crashes, but during that event, there were survivors, at least one survivor, and these beings that who were brought down by some type of hypersound weapon that we were developing at the time. They were just doing a flyby, and they were purposely crashed by the U.S. By us. I'm from New York City, so I mean by us, the U.S. So at any rate, at least one of those beings survived, and they were they were grays, a specific type of grays. There are many types of grays from the Zeta Reticulite system. Now, as has been reported by many insiders, what occurred after that was a kind of a treaty between, Harry Truman, and this is right after, a breath after World War II. And the gist of this treaty was that the Zeta Reticulites would have the laissez-faire, the go-ahead to extract DNA material, genetic material from a small percentage of the citizens of the Earth. And the barter would be that, the U.S., I'm calling to the U.S., but there may have been other countries involved, who knows, but the U.S. would receive technological information that they could handle at that time. So, I mean, what we're talking about now is this big leap that happened in the fiber optics. We're talking about integrated circuits, all kinds of things that were not even viable at the end of World War II. So this was the deal. And the way that the U.S. dealt with this technology is they kind of, parceled it off to different different huge mega companies, like, you guys at the Skunk Works, you get this, you guys at Hughes Aircraft, you get this, you guys at Intel, you get this. And so by doing that, nobody knew that they were working on so-called alien technology. It was all under the umbrella of the Department of Foreign Technology, I believe, the Department of which, and if any of your listeners are particularly interested in this period of time, there's a wonderful book by the late Captain Philip Corso, called The Day After Roswell. And he was the guy who was actually the head of the Department of Foreign Technology. So he was right there at ground zero. And that's a wonderful book that kind of explains the onset of some of these disturbing experiences that contactees have had, where the ova or the sperm are extracted. And this indeed went on, and it was negative and it was terrible. However, that contract or that agreement with, either the Truman or the Eisenhower administration, however you want to look at it, timed out. So at this present time, unless I'm treating someone who was kind of in my age category, it's very unlikely that I would see any kind of a negative, invasive DNA culling type of situation.
You're in Toronto, and you've seen a lot of people in just Toronto. So I can only imagine all the encounters all over the planet.
Oh man. Well, first of all, I do work with individuals all over the world. With the advent of Zoom, it is possible to induct people into trance and regress them and work with them in this wonderful way to help them integrate their experiences. This can be done online, but it's now estimated that maybe as much as 2/3 of the Earth's population has had some type of encounter, and I believe that MUFON reports that encounters not just of the third kind, but in-depth encounters have occurred with maybe 14 million people, which is bigger than the population of the state of New York. So, and this phenomena is not new. I mean, it's biblical, for goodness sake. There has been contact since our earliest recorded, remembered history. And of course, I believe it goes back infinitely farther than that. But I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. George Washington had an experience. I don't know if you're aware of this, when he was, excuse me, when he was crossing the Delaware, with the whole situation of Valley Forge. It was a turning point in the American Revolution. And I believe he went out into the woods to pray. And in his interpretation, a kind of a disc landed, and he had an experience with what he called angels. Now, I think that a religious reference point would have been much more likely at that time, rather than saying, three glowing interdimensional beings came and met with me. I think the religious reference point would certainly be the one we remember. But he had an experience with beings who instructed him on the rest of what he should do, and the new republic was born.
How do you identify a genuine experiencer versus someone who has a mental illness?
Wow, what a great question, Jeffrey. Especially, I've just been through a couple of things where people have come to me who were really unwell. So it's been, that's been preying on my mind, that very issue. Just a sec here. Well, first of all, not everybody that I see or that wants to see me is an experiencer. This we know. Not everybody. So when someone first approaches me about wanting to have a regression, to recall experiencers or what have you, I have a very long phone consultation with them. I mean, I ask a lot of questions, and by the time I'm done with that phone consultation, I have a pretty good idea of whether this person warrants, the process of regression, or whether they possibly have some kind of dissociative issue going on. So, and aside from being a hypnotherapist, I was also, a licensed psychiatric technician, which is kind of like a psych nurse. So I have a lot of experience with people who unfortunately are very mentally ill. And a certain percentage of the people that contact me are going to be mentally ill, and they're having hallucinations or confabulations or what have you. So now, even if someone comes to me and presents that way, and I'm not able to treat them in the, arena of my legal ability, because that's a big factor, Jeffrey. By law, I am not allowed to use hypnotherapy on anyone who has been diagnosed with a psychiatric illness. Now, I don't include like depression and anxiety in there, but certainly schizophrenia, dissociative disorder, any kind of borderline personality disorder, those would all be considered mental illnesses. So I have to be cautious on a number of levels. I have to keep my license, and I have to operate within the sphere of my legal ability, my legal treatment ability. So, that is a thing that when it comes up, I have a number of psychiatrists and psychologist colleagues who are open to the idea of extraterrestrial contact. So they can accept that person and treat them, and they will be able to weed out what is confabulation and what is not, if anything. And so that's what I do. I don't leave anybody out there like hanging out there. But certainly, as you said, I guess I'm going to say maybe about 10% of the people who contact me are not mentally well.
Can you give us some examples of some of the things that your clients have told you that were just shocking to you and just blew you away?
Wow. Oh, wow. Boy, that is quite a question. Well, let me tell you, I suppose it would be in some of the stories that have told me about what has happened to them that I've heard some of the, you know, creepiest, most disturbing things. So I was working with this wonderful gentleman. He's a professor at a university here in Canada, and he really was a lifelong experiencer. He had experiences throughout his whole life with primarily what we would call grays. So he told me about a time where he was returning from a camping trip in Quebec with his entire family, which, his mother and his father, and I think there were 4 kids. Now, you're too young to remember how this was, but back in the day, there were no seat belts. There were just, you just crammed into the back seat, no seat belts. If you were lucky, your dad was smoking and the window was open, like, that much. So, but anyway, it was that kind of scenario where he was coming back from Quebec, and suddenly his father just turned off like the main highway onto what can only be described as like a dirt road, and the kids were screaming, "What are you doing, Dad? What's it?" And then everybody just kind of calmed down and got quiet, and then they continued going along the dirt road. And my client said, at this point, he believed that he saw a bunch of Cub Scouts on bikes riding past the car on both sides. Now, this was most likely, some kind of a screen image that had been, created through psionics, whatever. I'm sure it was ETs, but he believed he saw, Cub Scouts. And when I got him into hypnosis, he could see what was really going on, that it was a whole bunch of grays surrounding the car. And eventually the car just stopped, and the craft was visible, and there were beings right in the road. And it appeared that the adults, the mom and dad, were very unconscious, very knocked out. But my client and one of his brothers, although they were unable to move physically, they were consciously very aware. So I guess the windows came down automatically, and all the kids were pulled by a force, just pulled out of the car and taken up to the craft for what seemed to be an examination, not a painful examination, nothing like that, but an examination of some sort. And my client never conked out. He was aware during the entire process, and he told me one of the most horrible things was he looked over and saw his older brother on the table next to him, and the older brother was just weeping because he couldn't stop what was happening. I know, I'm an eldest child, I kind of get that, that protective thing. And then he remembered being put back in the car. His parents were still unconscious, and I think that he had like his t-shirt on, backwards or something. And then they all came to consciousness somewhere entering Ontario, having lost maybe about 4 hours of time.
You mentioned something about a screened image. What is that?
Well, I think, and this is, the sort of the consensus of many of us who work in this field, that there are a number of extraterrestrial beings who are able to project realities, if you will, or environments or sets, and sometimes we will use that term. It's a screen memory. For instance, I'll give you an example. I'm going to talk about Wes Roberts for a moment, who I co-authored my recent book with. But Wes Roberts, again, a lifelong experiencer. And he told me about an experience that he had when he was probably 11 or 12, something like that. So he remembers being awakened and transported and like floated through the roof, whatever the deal was. And he was taken to an environment that looked like it was supposed to be a kid's birthday party. And there was all their balloons and all kinds of like what I would call set decoration around all over the place. And he was sitting in a chair in a circle of kids. Now, some of these kids were completely unconscious, just like knocked out, like not there. Some of the kids were very aware, and even Wes recognized them, and some of the kids were somewhere in between. So anyway, at a certain point in this fake birthday scenario, a being came out of a room who apparently was supposed to be the doctor and take a look at all the kids in some humorous way. And this being had like a kind of a clown mask on, which to the kids and to Wes was terrifying. It was like worse than whatever their own physical appearance could have been. So Wes explained that he completely said, "I'm out of here, F you," and everything disappeared, kind of like in the holodeck, in Star Trek. Everything disappeared, and then he was just thrown back onto his bed. So there seems to me to be no doubt that some beings, maybe not all, some beings are able to manufacture and project environments that are, so believable that the experiencers can move about in them for whatever the purpose is of the exercise or contact.
Do most of your clients already know they've had ET contact, or do they come to you and say, I sense that there's something weird going on in my life and I want to investigate it?
Well, I think far more common is, option 2 that you just mentioned. People who have a sense that there's something not quite right. They generally have sleep disorders. As I said, there may be missing time or missing memories. So many of these people who come to me, God bless them, I'm kind of like the last chance Texaco. I mean, a lot of these people have been to psychologists and psychiatrists who have said, well, you're not psychotic. I can't really explain what's going on, blah, 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 blah. So a lot of the time, I'm the last, person that these dear people will come to. And so many of them feel as if they might be mentally ill. So I would say one of the big commonalities is once we get in there and we, regress to a couple of, memories of high strangeness, then the individual who is allowed to remember those things, then the individual becomes aware that they have a far more complex identity than they had ever imagined before. And, we take it from there.
Do you think the majority of your clients are people who have encountered ETs by out-of-body experiences or from sleeping, or are the majority physical contact?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And you know what I would have to say to that, Jeffrey, is I think in early experiences, I'm going to say up to about age 12 or 14, those experiences seem to be very physical. In other words, someone comes down, the physical persona, the physical body is, transported somewhere, something happens. But what seems to occur after a period of time is that many of these experiences are really what I would call etheric experiences. In other words, it seems that many of the people that work with ETs or have come here to do that have the capability of bilocation or astral projection, whatever you wish to call it. So what I often hear about from the people that I work with is they have almost a secondary life. Not that it is secondary, but a co-concurrent life that occurs when the body is in a delta state, and then they willingly are able to project their persona to wherever it is needed. And some of the people tell me they have like jobs and they show up on ships with like other beings to collaborate. Some people have told me that they're like they're working against the dark side, and they go to free children and other beings that are being suppressed in some way or another. So it seems to me, Jeffrey, that all of the experiences that are physical lead up to the ability to transport, experience, enact in a body of less dense matter.
Speaking about children, have you seen many of your clients have alien-human hybrid children?
It happens all the time, where clients of mine have had experiences where they're aboard a craft and they are asked to hold and look at their children. Now, again, we're talking about a certain age range here. This kind of experience with the hybridized children that are living on craft or whatever, this is related to the Zeta Reticulite geno experiments that were done by the early 90s. So people of a certain age who are lifelong experiencers may very well tell me about being presented with their children. And sometimes it's oh my goodness, it's quite an emotional experience where the parents, my peeps, whether they're fathers or mothers, they feel the bond to those children, and they don't want to let them go. And I think this must have been something that was totally lost to these Zeta Reticulites as they became infertile or whatever went on. But yes, many of my clients have been presented with their hybrid children and have been inconsolable after the children were taken away from them.
Have you encountered any ETs that look human?
So many, Jeffrey, so many. In fact, boy, at this point, almost the majority of experiences that people have are with what I would call humanoid beings. Now, it's important to keep in mind that we are essentially, if you accept the work of Dr. Sitchin and all the great, Sumerian scholars, we are most likely the result of genetic upgrading from, the Anunnaki beings, who are in fact extremely humanoid and part of the whole Lyran civilization. And the Pleiadians are part of the Lyran civilization, and many, many other beings that have a real basic resemblance to us in the sense that they can pass among us with very little difficulty. So that's what I think there's a lot of that going on. I think there are a lot of Pleiadians here. I think that not only our government, but the governments of the world have been involved in détente and agreements with a wide variety of species that allow certain beings, access to, move among us.
Do you ever sit and think that I could have never foresaw myself talking about Pleiadians, Lyrians, and stuff like that 20 years ago?
Yes, I do. All I wanted to do was be an actress. It's all I wanted to do. It's all I was thinking about. Nothing else mattered. Yeah, it is. But, we are drawn inevitably to our life paths because we make agreements before we come in. And I am descended from a long line of very sensitive women. And I have no doubt that part of the reason that I'm attracted to this work is that it fits with my skill set in a way. So, but no, Jeffrey, no, I was thinking about, how I'm going to take what movie I'm going to see on Saturday. How would I know? I did not know. I was completely oblivious.
Have you ever had any clients that claim to be part of the Super Space program or the Super Soldier program?
Oh, man. Jeffrey, that's a whole nother show, man. I got to tell you, I have a lot of them. And that is the most salient current thing that I'm seeing now in my practice is many, many, many of these individuals are waking up after 20 years of silence, and these dear people, they have a very unique kind of PTSD, because if we are to accept their story and what's happened, many of them have been involved in some pretty brutal combat with some pretty funky stuff happening. So in my mind, I really believe now that we have thousands and thousands and thousands upon veterans who have given their lives and their youth to protecting our planet and our solar system, who are not acknowledged in any way and never will be. So that pisses me off. The secrecy of this whole thing really makes me angry. And the main reason is that we're not caring for our veterans of this, 20 and back program in the same way that we're caring for the veterans of the Vietnam War. Of course, we're caring for all veterans terribly. Don't get me, terribly. I'm a big advocate for that. Anyway, so yeah, that's apparently, according to some of the most recent information, the memory block used by the secret space program was only designed to last for 20 years, which is where we get this term 20 and back. That's, so I have a lot of people coming to me in their 40s who are having like bubbles of memories and parts of memories coming up. And that is not uncommon for me to see people in that age group. But I've worked with Randy Kramer. He's a great friend of mine. I believe him implicitly. He's passed through God knows how many lie detector tests. And, Randy Kramer not only has he passed through his own 20 and back, but he's now teaching psionics, which is a kind of a military grade remote viewing is maybe how I could explain it. And, he's one of the success stories, but most of these people are struggling emotionally, struggling.
How does the super soldier program work? I mean, are they taken and just disappear for 20 years from the planet, or are they going in their sleep and doing stuff?
Well, I think, both is true. Now, as I understand it, again, none of this is my like opinion or conjecture. It's just kind of a consolidation of what I have heard. As I understand it, individuals who are going to be in the so-called, secret space program are selected very early. And there is a high percentage of these people who are from military families, or and even a higher percentage of these people whose military families were stationed along the DEW line, which is a northern defensive line that was a US and Canadian um, defensive effort, so that we would be the first people to see the Russians lob anything, over the over the Antarctic. So that's the DEW line. Anyway, there are a lot of bases all along, and what you would call right on the border between Canada and the United States. So now Randy Kramer says, or he believes that he was genetically enhanced because his mother was something happened to her surgically, on the base, and whether or not the father approved is not known, but he believes there was a surgical enhancement to make him physically stronger. And in truth, a lot of these guys, Randy Kramer included, I think he's about 6'5". I mean, he's really um, a
He
very
sounds like a
dominant,
super soldier at 6'5".
yeah, kind of a domineering physical specimen. And so he says that was a construction. And so they, from the time he was a little guy, he had all kinds of encounters with both what I would call, military programs, and also with ETs directly. But it was the military programs who were really monitoring him. And at a certain point, at age 17, I believe he told me, after all these years of being like a cadet, and that was conducted under missing time, under messing with the time loop. Like he said, sometimes people even came to pick him up at school, and then he'd be dropped off a half an hour later at home, but it had been like 5 days. So there was a lot of fooling around with the timeline involved with all of this early education. And then at about age 17 or 18, he was the way anyone entering the military would be addressed. He was presented with paperwork to actually become a member of the Lunar Defense Force and the Mars Defense Force. Our so-called secret space program. So he signed up and served for 20 years under, in his case, all kinds of combat situations. Now, I would have to put in here that there are many different experiences that people can have, serving our globe on the, in the 20 and back program. I have one gal, and her whole business was to categorize and study and treat and unusual species from different planets. So we have a lot of different assignments. But here's Randy Kramer, big tall guy. He's in like the marine, like the equivalent, the Marines, and so for 20 years he battled, according to him, he battled several different species of reptilians. He was involved in blowing up, Phobos, the moon, which was a nasty ET base. And I know he has a book that is in development, and I hope it comes out soon. But it would certainly make a great movie. That's all I can say. But I believe him, and these are and it all makes complete sense to me. You know what? Because this divide and conquer, this creation of a of a secret, space oriented organization that would operate without any what's the word without having to answer to any democratic body. This is something I can totally understand that could happen, and I believe it has happened. And that's why all this little stuff we do with NASA, that's just media hype. We're already light years behind that. It's it makes me very sad that there are some people who believe that what NASA is doing is the last word. And I just don't believe that it is. I believe it's a fake kind of, false show to disguise what has been happening since World War II and what's happening now.
Do you think members of NASA are aware of the alternate space program, or are they kept in the dark?
I think by and large, they're not. I think we're dealing with people who are good people, who believe, who are patriots. And I think by and large that they are kept in the dark. And one of the reasons that I say that, this is a little personal, for years before I was a hypnotherapist, I was in the music business, and I used to work often at this very nice hotel that was right out there near Edwards Air Force Base, where the space shuttles would land and take off. And I was working there that month when that terrible tragedy happened, where the space shuttle exploded and the crew were killed. And the poor people, the officers, the scientists that had been involved with that project were like in my bar where I was performing, for 2 months, drinking themselves into a coma. So these were people that really felt as if they had failed and they were disgraced and they were in mourning. I don't think that maybe would have happened quite in that way if they had had an awareness of the gravitas and the extent of what actually was going on with regard to the space project.
So what do you think the ETs want? Do they want just to study us, or is there something else?
Well, I think, Jeffrey, that they, in a big sense, they feel a sense of responsibility for us. Certainly those beings that are our cousins, that are genetically connected to us, they feel a sense of responsibility. And I think that many beings are probably involved in like a Gene Roddenberry-esque United Federation of Planets. In fact, I hear this, over and over again, that this type of affiliation exists. But, the problem is that we're not ready. I think they're waiting for us, hoping for us, praying for us to join them in civilized, intergalactic, interdimensional contact. But the fact is, that we're still barbarians. Look at what's going on our planet. We're involved in ridiculous war, racism, children are starving. I mean, we have to clean up our own backyard. So I think what the benevolent ETs are waiting for, and it's just like when you have naughty kids, they have to learn to do that task, or they have to learn to do things themselves. That's what parenting is about. So I think there's a kind of a parental role that has been taken on by our Geno ancestors. And I think they're just waiting for us to, pardon me, get our shit together.
I don't see that happening anytime soon, because the only thing I feel like humans have changed is technologies. Besides that, we're still the same over the last 2,000 years.
Or longer.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't really change as beings, only our circumstances around us. But we could redirect. That's what the sophisticated societies have simply learned to rise above their whatever bit of animal nature is left, and redirect towards creativity and projects. And as a hypnotherapist, that's what I do all the time. I take away the negative stuff that people are doing or experiencing, and I put in positive, motivating, good stuff. And we can do it. It's just, we have a really strange planet. And I mean, talk about the diversity. Diversity is ridiculous. And talk about even intellectual capacity. I mean, you go down to the deep south and you've got people with bare normal intelligence, and then you've got like the Dalai Lama, and you've got Stephen Hawking. So we have a real diversity of physical bodies that people are in.
Do you think individual people can seek out and contact the ETs if they want to?
I do. I don't think you need any extra anything. And what I would recommend is just simply finding a quiet spot where you can meditate, a quiet spot where you're not going to be bothered. You can do this indoors or outdoors, and just put out the message. I would like to speak to any beings of love and commonality. Just put out a positive message right out there, and in some way there will be a communication. Non-physical communication, I believe, is the way the universe works. I do. I think that most advanced races are telepathic, and there's only one thing faster than the speed of light, and that's the speed of thought. And the speed of thought is propelling a lot of the civilizations, the wonderful civilizations that we are beginning to engage with.
I'm glad you went there, because do you think that those ships are traveling here by the speed of thought because the speed of light is too slow?
I do, Jeffrey. I do. I think sometimes the crafts and the things that we see would be maybe more like holographic projections. So I think we are seeing a variety of phenomena, but the speed of thought is absolutely key involved. Number one. Yeah.
What about implants? Have you had any of your clients show you their implants?
Oh, yeah, I have. My clients have shown me scars, implants, triangular scars, implants that I can feel from outside the skin. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. Now, my belief about implants is that they are, primarily what we would call step-up transformers. In other words, I think most implants, and I can't speak about the government stuff, but any implants that we receive from our extraterrestrial friends are designed to help us step up our vibration, so that we can communicate more easily and do all those things that we need to do more easily. And I don't see them as negative. I don't see them, often they just dissolve. Often they just dissolve when they're no longer necessary or when they've done their usefulness. But, as far as a tracking device, I mean, you have to kind of almost laugh at that, because we've known for years that every brain emits a unique electronic signature. Every brain is individual and has its own signal, and any evolved society is going to be able to pinpoint anybody they're looking for. So this fear idea of, oh my God, they put the implants in, they're listening to me, they're doing, I think all of that is paranoia. And the implant issues that I have seen, the implants have either dissolved or they've been benign. I, that would be my experience thus far.
What about crop circles?
Now, I think that crop circles are messages from cultures, as many people do. But there was a wonderful gal that I interviewed one time. Oh my goodness, what is her name? She's made several films about crop circles. And what she has photographed is really, really interesting. She was able to get photographic evidence, and I mean like on film, of energy orbs seeming to come out of the earth and move around and create the circle. So what I think may be happening is some beings may be able to harness earth energy in an intelligent way and use it to create these crop circles. Patty, oh God, what is her name? I'll send it to you later, because she's got a lot of footage that you should probably take a look at. But what she has seen and what she has photographed is literally balls of light coming up out of the earth, not a craft hovering above and lights coming down and blah blah blah, nothing like that. It's orbs of energy coming right up out of the earth and then seemingly being directed by some intelligence.
All right, I've picked your brain as much as I could, and I'm running out of time. So,
there's nothing left, Jeffrey. There's nothing left.
I'm sure we could go another hour, but your book is called Intersection, A True Story of Extra-Terrestrial Contact. Is it kind of like a culmination of your clients' stories over the years, or what?
Well, it is really about one client that I had the gift to have like 42 sessions with now, because after a while I knew I was going to write a book, and he just allowed me to have sessions. So it is co-written by Wes Roberts, but it is really an in-depth story of this one individual, this lifelong experiencer's journey from not even realizing what was going on with him to the point of amalgamating his identity and his memories and all of his stuff, into a strong cognitive persona. So it's a wonderful story. I think the one thing that's a little bit different about my book is I do have big chunks of the sessions that we did transcribed literally. So my hope would be that for the reader, it would be very much like participating in a regression session of this type. And it's available on Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, wherever you happen to Amazon. And it's Intersection, A True Story of Extraterrestrial Contact.
What is your website so people can find out more about you and your practice?
Oh, thank you. Well, my website is about to go under a little bit of a facelift. Actually, I could use some help too. What do you think? My facelift and my skin. Anyway, so the so my unfacelifted website, which will soon look 15 years younger, one hopes, is lightworkhypnosis.com, and that's all one word, lightworkhypnosis.com. And if you would like to reach out to me, even just to ask me a question, or for whatever reason, not necessarily to book an appointment, anytime you want to reach me, I may take a minute, but I will always get back to you. So my email is Lesley, Lesley, @lightworkhypnosis.com.
I believed that you said you're working on another book. What else do you got?
Yes.
Besides that, what else are you working on that you want us to know about?
Well, I am I'm working on another book, which is actually autobiographical, and it's show business stories. It doesn't really have a whole lot to do with anything metaphysical. But the book following that is going to be called Midwives of Disclosure, and it is a focus on the various people that are working today to establish non-physical ET human communication and interaction.
All right, Lesley. Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
We are not alone, and we have never been alone. We are surrounded by loving beings who want the best for us. All we have to do is open our hearts and our minds and stop thinking about the other people around us on the planet as different. We are all one.
Thank you for that message. And Lesley, thank you again for being my guest today. I really appreciate you, and I wish you success in whatever you're doing.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It was my absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you for all the great work you're doing to open people's minds. It's wonderful.
Well, it was my pleasure to have you, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.